Welcome, everybody. My name is Melanie Brooks, and I work as the audience coordinator at the Bangor Daily News, and I handle programming for BDN Events Online. Thank you all for joining me tonight. And I'm really excited about tonight's event. We're going to be talking about the arts and the pandemic, and I'm glad you're all here to join in the discussion. You'll notice that you are all muted, and that's so that we can give our special guests the time and quiet that they need to answer our questions. And once we are done, probably about 5:30, we're going to ask you to share your questions with our guests. I have some, but we want to hear from you too. So since there are a lot of you here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to send in your questions through the chat function, and that's a little bubble at the bottom of your screen. I've sent a message that says, "Welcome, everybody." You can send in your questions to me or to everybody, and in the second half of tonight's events, I will go through them and get to as many as I can, I promise. Before we get started, I would like to thank our event partner, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and we are thankful to have Bill Bourassa, Director of Maine Sales, here, and he is going to share a few words of welcome. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Melanie. I promise to be brief. Hello, everyone. If you've heard me speak here before or other events, or perhaps my colleague, Bill Whitmore, we really enjoy joining these. One, because many of us are still working remotely. Our office in Portland has been closed since mid-March. And although we've snuck in from time to time just to feel a little bit normal, most of us are completely remote. So being able to join, say hello, see the faces, as well as some backgrounds is excellent. I will simply say for Harvard Pilgrim, thank you again for having us here. We're very glad to be helping support this. And we are helping to support our state as well. So far through today's date, we've contributed close to $2 million from our Harvard Pilgrim Foundation to lots of nonprofits and other organizations throughout the state, including to organizations in areas of your readership. I was delighted to join this one. In fact, Melanie, when you sent me the link to join, I'm also a lover of the arts. I'm interested to hear how each of these organizations have changed in order to continue to offer the services they do. I will add, somewhat related, I do participate. I'm a musician by hobby, I guess. I play in a couple of different bands here in the Portland area. The studio that we play at forces us to stand 10 feet apart. It's a little interesting. We don't get to be close, and I used to like to play next to the drummer, for instance, but I can't do that at the moment. So anyway, I'll stop talking at this point. Thank you again, and I'm very interested to hear from our guests.
Thank you so much. We're happy that you're here. And we're also happy to welcome our BDN subscribers. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do these things. Your support of local journalism has helped us continue the mission started in 1890 to give all the news of the day, every day, without fear or favor. So I am very excited to welcome our three special guest speakers to our event tonight. First off, Bari Newport is the producing artistic director of the Penobscot Theatre Company in Bangor. Stuart Kestenbaum is Maine's Poet Laureate, former director at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, and the designer of the residency program at Monson Arts in Monson, Maine. And Mark Bessire is the Judy and Leonard Lauder director of the Portland Museum of Art. So I am going to kick it off tonight, and I have a few questions for each of these special guests to answer, and then we'll get to your questions. So I'm going to start with Bari. The PTC has been around for nearly 50 years, producing shows all year long. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what, gosh, the past 5 months has looked like at the Bangor Opera House for you guys?
Well, just because something's shuttered on the outside doesn't mean that it's not working furiously on the inside. Much like a duck, which is paddling ever so serenely on top of the water, underneath, my God, it's paddling furiously. And that's probably the best metaphor for how to describe the last 5 months. we furloughed half of our staff, and the rest of us, and that was mostly our production staff, when we decided that we were not going to be able to produce our last 3 productions. We first dipped our toe into the freezing waters of streaming a live performance, our production of Safety Net, which had not yet opened, closed before it opened, and we wanted to make sure that at least our subscribers and some new ticket buyers had an opportunity to see that rolling world premiere. The rest of us who remained on staff all went to extremely shortened hours, and we worked very hard to figure out how to welcome audiences back into the Bangor Opera House first, how to produce a season that was going to be approved by the Actors Union and the Stage Directors Union and the Scenic Design Union. What we eventually came up with is the season that we announced last night, which we're all really excited about. Because I think for a lot of creative people, this past 5 months has been stifling artistically, and in many ways, that's been the most difficult part. Finally being able to come up with a season that may not be traditional, certainly is not a traditional theater season, certainly is not one that we've ever produced before or even imagined producing ever. We focused on how we can release our creative spirit and create how we can keep the company alive. And I think we came up with something that's both distinctive and unique and delightful and engaging, which will serve not only our immediate community, but of course, a community much further than our live shows could have ever reached. And frankly, creating work that our imaginations probably never would have reached either. We're doing things like dog operas, 3 operas formed by dogs. We've commissioned playwrights and puppeteers from all over the country. And we're thrilled to not just be having plays that have a camera in front of them, but to be creating original content, original work, frankly, stuff that we probably would never have been able to produce on our stage, and deliver that through this new medium to our audiences, both near and far.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You were a part of an open letter from Maine's nonprofit arts leaders. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is and what you hope comes from it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a part of 2 letters, one from performing arts groups in the professional performing arts groups in the state, and one that is a larger cultural arts group. And I think for both of those groups, which of course are the performing arts group is a subgroup of the arts and culture group, all of it really came into fruition because we felt that we did not have a place around the table during any of the very important economic discussions that were going on at a state level, the reopening plans that were going on at a state level. And certainly from the performing arts perspective, we were the first to close and will likely be the last to reopen. So it's very important, not only to us, but to the communities in which we serve. And as all nonprofits have the same mission, which is to serve our community, whether we're an arts organization or a hospital or a humane society, we're all here to serve our communities, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to continue that service. Additionally, not only are we arts and culture, but we are also small businesses. We are also economic drivers. We are also, some of us are very much in the education realm. Some of us are very much in the hospitality and tourism realm. We actually span across many, 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 many different group sectors, and want to make sure that our presence and our voice is essential, even though we are often deemed non-essential. I think it's interesting to ask oneself, is it more important to have bread or a circus? And I've been like really focused on that. Obviously, if you're really hungry, you have to have bread, but I'm sure going to miss that circus.
That's a great. Um, so there was a recent Maine Arts Commission survey. I think it came out last month that said some 51% of people that responded said that they would not want to attend performances in an indoor venue until a vaccine is available. Now, I know that you at the Penobscot Theatre have gone to great lengths to come up with different ways that you can show performances and different ways that people can see your performances. So, what sort of advice would you give to people that love their local theater or love to go to concerts or other performance venues on how they can help those organizations and small businesses now?
Support us, um, encourage us, um, donate. Let us know that you understand our value and that you will be with us during this time and when we reopen, and will help us get to the reopening. Um, in our case, we decided that we could spend the next 3 months fighting with unions and fighting with a virus, or we could use those resources to bring our staff back, to do a bunch of much needed projects for the company and for our buildings, which will be able to better accommodate our productions and our audiences when audiences can come back. And in the meantime, focus on keeping the company alive, not just by doing anything, but by challenging ourselves to do the most creative, most unique work that really turned us on internally. So that would be what I would ask of our audiences, both people who know our work and people who are perhaps intrigued by dog operas. The best way to support us is by supporting us. We will reopen, and it's going to be a really interesting road to get there. So join us, join all of us.
Yeah, I'm absolutely intrigued by what you're going to be putting on, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So thank you. So if you have questions for Bari, please leave them in the chat, and we will get back to her a little bit later on. Next up is Stuart Kestenbaum. So I have some questions for you, Stu. Can you tell us a little bit about what Monson Arts is for those of us in the audience who aren't familiar with the program?
Sure. Monson Arts was started by the Libra Foundation. And our first programming was in 2018, and the foundation wanted to work on economic development and the arts in rural Maine. They chose Monson and Piscataquis County. Piscataquis County is the poorest county in the state. Monson had lost moosehead manufacturing, so there was not a lot of activity, and they wanted to develop some programs. They asked me to design a program, and what we developed is residencies for artists and writers. We have 10 at a time, and they have a month or 2 week-long residencies. They receive a stipend. They have room and board, great studios to work in, a house to live in. We also have workshops for people from Maine and elsewhere around the country. And I think a thing that distinguishes our program from some other residencies is that we also develop concurrently with that workshops for people in our community, meaning at this point, teenagers. We have a program for kids from 6 area high schools. The area covers probably the area of Rhode Island, I would think. It goes from Newport to Jackman to Greenville, Dover, Foxcroft, Guilford. So the kids in the community can be a part of what goes on in a creative space. And behind all the programs is a focus on time and space for creative work. The foundation renovated lots of buildings in the town, over 30 buildings, great studios and great places to work. So what we hope will happen is that more people are going to know about Monson. People are going to want to relocate there. It's a part of the state that could use more people coming to it. And we think that having the arts there is a kind of driver for that.
So you suspended Monson Arts programs and residencies in March.
Right.
And you have recently restarted the residency program. And I'm wondering the differences? What does it look like now as compared to what it would have looked like otherwise?
Well, normally we would have 10 artists and writers in residence. Now we limited it to 5. Each person gets their own house to live in rather than have group housing. We have enough buildings to be able to do that. And people are getting their meals, but taking them back to their houses. So basically we cut the size in half. People are distanced. It just began 2 days ago. Tonight, the residents are going to have a meeting, but it'll be a Zoom meeting, even though they're all in the same town. So doing some things even at a distance within the town and just following CDC guidelines and having fewer people. But it feels good to be doing what we were designed to do, to kind of start up and do that again. But flexibility is really a key in terms of starting up again.
That's completely understandable. Now, Monson is a rural town. You pass right through it on your way to Greenville. What has the impact been in closing down the programs this spring and summer at Monson Arts for the town?
Right. During the summer, we would have had larger groups coming in because we have workshops, 2 workshops at a time in the studios, and we also were scheduled to have a group from USM be there. So there definitely is less of a buzz in the town. I think there's a certain kind of excitement. The program's only, this would be our 3rd summer, so just a excitement about seeing other people in town. All the studios and the housing are right in the downtown, around town. So you see people walking around. It's not isolated the way Haystack or Skowhegan is. You're really part of the town. So I think that's missed. The economic impact, I think, is not that great as the kind of cumulative economic impact on that region of not having as much tourism. But I think the kind of energy of seeing people come in and be excited about the work they're doing and walking up and down the main street, meeting people, that's missed.
You were with Haystack Mountain School of Crafts on Darnell for many years, and it is a much bigger program than Monson Arts, and Monson Arts is much newer, but it's still in a pretty rural part of Maine, Deer Isle. So has the impact been differently in that community without having those programs?
I think Haystack, within the context of Deer Isle, is such an institution that when it announced that it was closing, it was like when the NBA said we're not going to do the season. It's like, whoa, Haystack's not going to have its season. So I think emotionally there was an impact of that. There are more people that come in, and Haystack has spawned, galleries in the area. People would go to restaurants. People go to the store to buy things. So that's about 100 people who are there at a time. So that, on an island of, with a year-round population of 3,000, having that kind of people coming in, seeing what's going on, being excited, that's definitely had an impact. I don't know the specific economic impact. The school's been able to maintain all its staffing and doing work on studios, which you could never do if it were in session during the summer. But it definitely, I think the sense of like a certain spirit, well, that's not going to open up. That really means this is a serious thing when an institution like that closes. And I think, just to echo what Bari said, I think all the programs are really, from the Portland Museum to the theater to Haystack to Monson Arts, are really, it's a kind of emotional, spiritual driver in a community. It's like if that place is open, then it's really about our human capacity, about how we can look at things, how we can think about the arts, how we can think about our lives. And so having that go dark, in a sense, really, to me, that's the greatest impact. And as we've talked in this group that signed the letter, as the arts are coming back, it's really such a critical part of what's going to make Maine come back. It's not, it's an important way for people to understand what's happened to them and a way to respond to that.
Yeah, people miss the circus, as Bari said.
I should say, as poet laureate, though, it's been a great time for poetry because people turn to poetry. The darker the time gets, the more they turn to poetry. So I participated in virtual readings where you might get 25 people in a library, but you'll have readings where there'll be 90 or 100 people. So it's it's made certain things more accessible in a way, and gotten larger audiences. But there's nothing, I think, like having people be in a common space together.
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much, Stuart. I have some other questions, but let's move on to Mark at the Portland Museum of Art. Thank you so much for being here. Mark and I had emailed a little bit about the PMA and the pandemic and what has been going on. And Mark, you mentioned in an email to me last week that the word support has been your mantra at the PMA. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what it means to you?
Sure. Thank you, Melanie. And thanks, to Bangor Daily News and to Harvard Pilgrim for sponsoring all of us. We really appreciate it. And I'm always proud to be on any program with Stu and Bari. I'm just so fortunate to have so many great leaders for the cultural sphere in Maine. And I noticed that even on our call or Zoom meeting, there's a bunch of cultural leaders here and a few of my colleagues from the museum. And many of you who are probably listening in are either supporters of our organizations or organizations in your local community. And just want to thank you for the support of the arts. It is a really, really difficult time for the arts. It's a really difficult time for all businesses. But the arts, as Stu said, will come through, and the arts have a way of shining under tragedy. And as our friend Monica, who's also on the call, it reminds us that our big meetings about business and money, art really does bring healing power and brings creative power to get through difficult times. And not having the art really is a void in all of our lives. Having the music not play is just not a good thing for all of us. Support, Bari mentioned it, and Stu a little bit in his poetic way. 20 years ago, the Portland Museum of Art, or most museums across the country, would have just shut. Pandemic, nobody's coming, shut the doors. But in the last 20 years, all of our organizations, and particularly museums, have really become community-based institutions, not necessarily ivory towers, making art for a small group of elite people who come to art museums and support them. So when we closed our doors, like Bari mentioned, our doors never closed. We just had to find a different way to serve our community. We wanted to be there to support our community during this really difficult time. So we, like Bari and other organizations, have really doubled down on the digital. It's not ideal, but what's really wonderful about it is we've had things like a Nelson social justice lecture that used to get 160 people in the museum. We had 750 people from around the country watching. So there are little pieces of this that are really positive. The unfortunate is, like the virus is showing us, the inequities of life mean that not everybody has a computer, not everybody has access. And we're certainly finding that in Maine. Rural Maine needs better service for digital networks for crisis like this. It is really the inequities of our society are being revealed in ways in which we never imagined, but we should have. And we're really all at blame and should all be ashamed that we haven't worked hard enough to understand when a virus comes through, what's taking place and who's getting hurt the most. So the flip side of the support is, as much as we're out there trying to support our community, is that, like also Bari and Stu I've said, and you have said, Melanie, no one's coming and paying, so philanthropy is the answer. And because these organizations, we've been around since 1882, Haystack, Penobscot, we have loyal followers. So, I've got my subscription for the Portland stage. I'm going to buy it anyway. I have no idea what Anita's going to do. I'm just going to buy my subscription and let her tell me what to do. I'm going to do my membership. I'm going to sign up for my local opportunity that I would normally. And I'm just going to trust that they're going to provide the best programming they can. Because what you're really doing by having that subscription is keeping people working. And the best thing we can do for our state is have people continue to work so then they can support their communities. So it's a two-way street, this support. We're here to support our community. And then if you're doing that right, creating relationships, providing the art, your community will support you.
That's great. Without the amount of visitors at the PMA, because museums are sort of a walk-through experience, how do you accomplish your goals as an organization in a year like this? And what has had to change at the museum?
So tough, Melanie, to describe the experience. And I know, talking with my colleagues on these phone calls and writing these letters, how emotional that we get thinking about it. For many of us, not just nonprofits in the cultural sphere, but for the business environment in Maine, this was going to be one of the biggest summers and biggest years for Maine ever. The bicentennial was going to help us, but we've been building to a point where, you know, we're just at the point in many ways where we're before the recession in 2009 in terms of numbers, people visiting, disposable income, growth in hotels, tourism, ecotourism. We're expecting 200,000 visitors this year. We're going to be fortunate if we 50,000, and that would be really fortunate for us. All of us are trying to figure out what do you do with no earned revenue in a nonprofit arena, and how do you provide services and keep your people working? And it's been really tough. We've been fortunate because I also want to thank the state of Maine for being so good. We actually have been open to the museum, getting about 100 people per day. That's very many people. It's been very difficult to keep moving with that. But, you know, we want to have our employees safe, and we want our visitors to be safe. And that's what's happening. And that's what's successful. Moving forward, we're really digging into, I think, social justice and the inequities of what's taking place across the country, and how it's a great reckoning moment for museums. We're now thinking about what kind of museum we're going to be after the pandemic. I think these protests and the social inequities we're seeing in society are really revealing also the blemishes of museums of art historically, that we really have been bastions of white privilege, and we really do need to recognize what we've done in the past and what we can do in the future. And how do we add power to people of color, to these organizations? How do we diversify our staffs, our boards? How do we provide arts that is more diverse? That's really what we're thinking about right now.
That answer sort of goes with my next question about, you know, like you had said, museums in the past without visitation would have just shut down. So I can imagine that many museums across Maine, and really museums across the country, are rethinking their place in the communities. So I'm wondering what you think museums could look like in the future.
You know, it's a great question, and we're thinking about it. So we even began today and yesterday, and this week we're closed for training. We are rethinking the visitor experience and Department of Protection Services and how people come into the museum and what that experience is like. And we're unifying our security with visitor experience to create an atmosphere that's very different than it was before. We're also reviewing what our education programs look like. Maybe we need to be thinking more about public partnerships and community engagement. Those are the kind of serious changes you're going to see in institutions. And thinking again about that issue of equity, you know, we used to call ourselves an American museum with a great small European modernist collection. Well, 90% of our American Art Museum was white male artists, and they're really great artists. But that's not the reflection of our community today. And it's not fair to open up your doors and say you're an American museum with not all American cultures being represented as much as possible. So museums really are at a point where either they're going to choose to transform themselves, as Darren Walker has said, who's the head of the Ford Foundation. You know, we should go back to what we originally meant to be as museums, which is represent all cultures to all people who come to our museums. And if we don't do that, if we don't transform ourselves, it's merely going to be tokenism. And that's really not acceptable right now. In terms of museums in the big future, I think even museum architecture is going to be shifting. You're going to find museums much more like community cultural hubs, cultural centers, looking for more partnerships, more collaboration, and bringing in different communities that previously might not have wanted to come to the museums because they didn't feel represented. That's what's going to be successful. You may, on the sad side, see some museums close and a lot of consolidation. And some of the larger organizations that are not paying attention to these equity and social justice issues are going to have real trouble.
Thank you for that. Thank all three of you. We have some questions that have come in. So Tom would like to know how much support you have seen from your supporters and donors during the shutdown prompted by the pandemic. Have they stepped up? Bari or Mark, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'll take a step back. Thanks so much for the question. I really appreciate it. You know, we have actually done fairly well. We run about a, let's say this year, because we had a big year, $7 million budget, and about 1.6 million was coming in through earned revenue. And we would suggest that our earned revenue is probably, instead of 1.6 million, we're going to be fortunate if we get 300,000. On the philanthropy side, so that's like, you know, what, a 70–80% drop. On the philanthropy side, we actually are only anticipating probably a 20–25% drop in philanthropy, which is extraordinary in these times. And we fully understand people who are having difficult economic circumstances cannot support their museum, but those that can, we hope will. Membership has been increasing. Some gifts have been reasonably large. The irony of this for all of you, me as well, is why the stock market continues to do as well as it does in terms of philanthropy and larger foundations and funding. Having a stock market strong actually can be helpful ending the year. But our membership has always been one of the strongest in the country for our demographic, and it continues to be.
As far as Penobscot Theatre Company, 73% of our income comes from ticket sales, which is pretty typical in what is deemed to be a rural community, and what the definition in terms of American theater anyway of rural community is a community that has little to no major corporations. So I came from Atlanta before here, where we had Home Depot and Coca-Cola and Delta and UPS and huge corporations, right, that were, you know, able to seriously support major parts of many arts organizations, but certainly the theater I worked at. And it's different here, and in many ways, it's extremely democratic. That if people want it, they have to show that they want it through buying tickets. And by supporting. And so the other part, right, of the equation is the philanthropy, and that is made up with grants and individual donations and foundation support and city and state and federal support. So you know, I've always believed that financial management is artistic management, and every financial decision is an artistic decision, and vice versa. So we have been, in the last 8.5 years, extremely focused on saving. And we put 20% of every corporate gift away into a savings account, so that should something like this happen, we're able to have some cushion, which we were extremely grateful for. We did not use our PPP. We had hoped that it would be extended, and as it was, we were able to do what we're doing now, which is restarting a season, and therefore re-employing everybody, and therefore hoping that by producing, we are, if not bringing in 73% of our income, enough income to find new sponsors to support this upcoming season, new advertisers who may wish for their product or place to reach a much larger audience, and also keep our team. We're Penobscot Theatre Company. We're not Penobscot Theatre. We're not a place. We're a group of artists employed, and most importantly, creating. We're extremely grateful to our sponsors, both corporate, individual, foundational, and our city and state and federal resources have truly stepped up in this time. We need more. I know I speak for all of us in that the road is long, and we're going to need additional support to get us through. And, you know, it's really more than just one person can do. We all need to look at ourselves as philanthropists. I think sometimes people think that that's someone else's job, that's someone who has a lot in the stock market. But really, whether it's $25 or $50, the act of philanthropy is an individual act, and we're all philanthropists in that way.
Which leads me into an email question that came in to me yesterday. Curt wanted to know, how do we get local and state governments to understand the impact live theater makes on our economy? And that could be live theater, that could be any sort of performing arts, museums. How can organizations do it, and how can we do it as citizens? Go ahead, Mark. I see you have your hand up.
I might just jump in, because you know, one big thing, a great question, and I think that we need more representation on the state level. I think that individually, all of us who are leaders of cultural organizations in our community are community leaders, and we're trying to be more statewide focused together. I really do think, and I aspire to, I think there should be a minister of culture or a cabinet seat at Janet Mills's cabinet who represents the culture of Maine. I just think that there is a true opportunity for that person to have a great contribution to the conversation that's taking place around creativity in so many ways in such a rural state. You know, the fabric of our communities are frayed so thin in so many ways in the last few years. And these local organizations, whether small, medium-sized, or large, or even libraries, are so key to these communities when our demographics, literally we're the oldest and least diverse in the country. We need to fight for our communities, and we need someone at the table helping culture be just as important for economic development. It is. We bring in so many people. We have so many people who work for us, and we're key to the tourism industry. And it's a really key role, and we don't advocate well enough for ourselves.
I see Bari and Stuart nodding their heads. Yeah. Please chime in.
Well, I do think I agree with what Mark said, and I think we haven't told our story often enough. But I also think there's, if you go back, say 30 years, there's a much greater understanding in the community at large of the impact that arts and culture have. You can't be in a place like Portland and not recognize that having Mecca in one part of Congress Street and the PMA at the other part aren't the anchor stores in the mall, kind of, if you can talk about malls at all anymore. But, you know, it's perhaps not an apt comparison, but real drivers. And, you know, the impact that having the arts in Monson has had just in the few years that younger people are hanging out, they want to be there. People stop, they don't go to Greenville, they stop in Monson. You know, that people get that. I think they get it, and I think they support it, but we need to articulate that more often and get at the table that Bari talked about. When people talk about economic recovery, you know, the arts are the natural beauty of Maine is part of Maine, and Maine's cultural heritage is another huge part of what brings people to the state and keeps them here as well.
Art brings business. It's pretty simple. Stuart just mentioned Monson and that the art is an attraction there. Penobscot Theatre Company is a reason that people come to downtown Bangor from all over the state. I mean, Bangor has a population of 30,000 people. We serve 40,000 people. You know, these institutions are a major reason why these towns are here with their identity intact. So anyway, art brings business, and the healthier the ecosystem is, the better. But I think it is pretty clear to all of us that yes, we do need a stronger, more unified voice. The fact that we're always described as nonprofits certainly hurts our messaging. So trying to figure out a way to both be clear that what we do may not on paper equal a bottom line that is the same as a for-profit business. The bigger picture of it is that we actually bring in more and create more revenue than many of the businesses around us.
True. And I live in Bangor, and so I can absolutely attest to that. Stu, as a poet and a writer, wondering if this pandemic and the protests around racial justice has given you any fodder for new poems or projects?
Yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows. You know, sometimes it can be a feeling of being discouraged, I think, at the state of the world. But then there are also, I think, moments where it inspires you to move forward with projects. I think there's definitely people having more time to do the work is important. And then I think I actually was just writing a piece for the Union of Maine Visual Artists Journal about, I think, you know, there are moments when of crisis is really when we rise to our best selves. I think we could also descend to our worst selves, as we know, but knowing what's important to you, it's like, you know, what means the most in your life. And I think that's when why people turn to poetry. You know, when it's a dark time, they don't say, you know, I think they might read the newspaper, but I think they want to get to something that's deeper, something that speaks about what it is to be a human and how they can see themselves moving through a crisis. So it's a, you know, the upside is I think people know what's important to them. When it gets darker, you say, this is what really means something in my life. This is what I really need to do. And that's really where the arts always shine.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering from the three of you, this pandemic has been hard. It's been hard personally, it's been hard professionally. Are there any unexpected positive outcomes from this sort of pause and shift? And if they are, I'd love to have you share what they are with us.
Well, I'll certainly start. Definitely a positive has been getting to know my colleagues. Often I think that we're in totally different parts of the state. We're often isolated. It's been a wonderful opportunity for collaboration, to be part of these arts and culture groups, both with the larger arts and culture group that has been formed, but also with my theater community, where I think many people probably thought that we were already talking once a week, but that wasn't the case. And it's certainly opened the door for new ideas, new collaborations, and a new internal strength through the arts and cultural community and the performing arts community that I think will be long lasting, and it'll be very interesting what we can create together. That's one. Two is what you had mentioned earlier, that it's or Mark, that there's opportunity to do all kinds of things and reach all kinds of people that we've never reached before, and collaborate with all kinds of people that we've always wanted to collaborate with but hadn't been able to because of time and space. So as I mentioned last night, I have this bold idea box, and the moment that we decided that we were going to stop trying to push the boulder up the mountain, and we're going to find freedom of the creative spirit instead, I didn't just choose one card, but I grabbed a whole handful, and that has opened the door to collaborations with incredible puppeteers from Atlanta, and incredible art life coaches from Los Angeles, and writers from all over the world, from Iran and Berlin. And so definitely silver linings there.
It's such a hard question. Like when people ask you every day, how you feeling? You know, I'm like, you know, I feel really bad. You know, it's like, you know, I'm with Bari. There are positive aspects of this, and I'm an optimist, and I know Bari is, and I can tell Melanie you are, and Stu, and we will find opportunities in this, but it's pretty depressing. You know, we're losing people, we're losing artists, we're losing friends, we're watching our communities change drastically. We're watching the social protests and police violence in ways in which we've never recognized before. And how do we then move as organizations and people in the communities, you know, into another world after seeing all of this? And I think we've all got to really step in, and the opportunity here is, as the country has had kind of this woke moment, this window of opportunity to change is very brief. You don't get many historical moments where you're going to look back in 20 years and go, did I do something when I had a chance to really do something different when it's happened in 2020? 2020 is infamous for the rest of our lives and for generations. And do we step up, and do we make 2020 not just something we talk about, but something that changed? And I think we all need, as citizens, to really, really wake up and start thinking about what the world's going to be like after COVID and after this social justice movement. And how do we recognize these inequities in our society? And how do we come back and really begin to heal that? We're not ready for healing. We're still in the middle of tragedy. The positive things, I want to leave on a positive note. I've loved being with my family. Both my girls are, you know, away, and they're back. My mom showed up, you know, and then my girls brought back their buddies. And so at one point we probably had 9 people in my house and 2 dogs, all, you know, quarantining. So it's been a really incredible moment for family to come together. If you're privileged enough to be at home and have food on the table and be fortunate enough to be healthy, family has certainly been the blessing. I think the earth is much better off because we all got out of our cars and we weren't blowing smoke in the air. So, you know, the other tragedy taking place is the climate crisis. You know, the Mother Earth or Father Earth had a moment to breathe, And let's all try to think about how we can give Mother and Father Earth that chance to breathe some more, because it was a great moment, but it's fleeting. And I want to thank you, Melanie, and the Bangor Daily News for letting us have this platform to share with your community. I know Bari and Stu and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the arts. We don't get many chances like this, so we really do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I think 2020 is going to be the year of the big idea box. I like that, Bari. I had a question that came in from Alice, and I know possibly all three of you work with the youth in your programs. And Alice is concerned about how arts in the schools, or even arts outside of the schools, may be further eroded as a result of the crisis. I know you couldn't have theater camp this summer in person, or art class. So she wanted to hear your opinions about that for the younger generation.
I can say that what we've started to do for next year, the school year that's about to start with the green light all around, is we're not going to be able to do the programs that bring kids from 6 high schools together in Monson because they can't do field trips and other things, but we want to be able to provide opportunities wherever we can to bring smaller groups to Monson, to make art, to look closely at things, to pay attention, which is at the heart of art making. And that it's really critical because in rural schools, there've been some kids are dropping out, as I understand it. If their kids can get another job and they don't need to get the degree and they're going to school remotely, then that's, people can be completely disengaged. And art, I think it's incumbent upon us to do things that will engage people and to find ways. And they're not going to be easy ways. Like you can't just, whatever program it's got to be, if artists are creative thinkers and flexible, and not that art owns that solely, but to be able to be flexible in how we respond to what needs to happen in the next year. It's not like one size fits all, but just finding things to happen. There was a very positive thing I heard on public radio, was a principal from, I think it was Oxford or Paris, was talking about doing things outside because it's easier, in terms of distancing. And they were rethinking that they could do, math by doing multiples in nature. Or if you're going to look at observing things closely, if you're looking at art and you want somebody to pay attention to a leaf, a seed, anything like that, and you're looking at it, it's there are opportunities, I think, to get us out of thinking how school has to be. But the school budget issues, we don't even know the half of it yet, I don't think, in terms of what's going to happen. Those are all kind of iceberg issues, I think, in terms of, state revenue that goes to local schools is a huge part of what the state does. And it's a real challenge.
I definitely think it's something to be concerned about. I know so many public school and private school teachers of visual art, music, certainly theater, all over the country that have been let go. So I am very concerned about it. I think that it's absolutely essential for every human to know that they have the creative spirit inside of them. And that's what I think is God. That's what we all have inside of us. And it's a terrible, terrible tragedy to not wake that spark up in each individual human. It's something that makes humans stand apart from the rest of our animal species, that we can create. So yeah, I'm pretty concerned about it too. I'm also very interested in what can be done. I was very interested in this magician who teaches magic tricks with using things in your house. Very interested in teaching that's done by engaging with what is authentic around you. So I think that it, on the other hand, is a really inspirational time for imaginative thinking around creative teaching. I certainly am not an expert in that myself, but I'm very interested in it when I hear about it. Scavenger hunts that are going on in one's house. What's the softest thing in a room? You know, there's ways to turn on the delight of a person's brain and open one's heart.
Very true. Creative. I've had to do a lot of my own creative thinking with my arts loving child this spring. And I know that that's something that a lot of people, a lot of their kids or grandkids are missing right now. We have about 8 minutes left. Is there anyone that has a question that they'd like to pose for themselves? You can feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up and ask our guest speakers.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. So,
Go ahead, Curt. Nice to have you here.
Bari, tell them about our idea to perhaps create something statewide which would be like a map that tourists from out of state could follow to find Monson, to find the art museum, to find our different theaters, and be able to say they could come up from Georgia and have a map that would say you can find these different arts institutions all over the state of Maine, to sort of drive out of state travel coming forward that we talked about. You were in that session, weren't you?
Yeah, I was just echoing your great idea, which was something that you knew about from the Fulton Theater, where your husband takes out a full-page ad in the New York Times, yep. Right? And I was thinking where really he's driving theater business, theater tourism, which is a real thing. It's amazing how many people come to a new state and seek out, you know, where the regional theater is or where the performing arts organization is in that place. So yeah, theater tourism and art tourism, these are real things. And there are certainly, I mean, I know there's the sculpture map, right, in Maine. There's the beer map, there's the wine map. Like, so I don't know, I just thought it was it was a great idea. And hearing about the New York Times ad made me think that, yes, the performing arts should be working together too. Maine has a very rich history of long-standing performing arts organizations. And we should all be taking out an ad together and be driving New England tourism this way, specifically to all of our organizations.
And if you add the visual and visual arts and museums, I mean, it's an even richer vacation for somebody to come up and take part in.
That's right.
Melanie, could I say something?
Yes, I was just going to say that I saw you, so feel free to jump in, Kreg.
Well, thank you very much. And it's really nice to see everybody here. I just wanted to kind of bring up this little project we're doing at the University of Maine called the Jack Pine Project, which I had mentioned in an earlier cultural Zoom call a few weeks ago. So we're hiring artists to do workshops with non-artists to use the arts to let them tell their own stories about the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've got about 10 or so workshops going on right now or starting soon, from incarcerated veterans in the Maine Department of Corrections prison systems to cancer patients in the Ellsworth area. We have 2 theater directors and playwrights who are doing them. And Bari, you might be interested in working with Stephen Legavietz from the Camden Shakespeare Festival, who's doing a workshop with theater folks around the States to talk about what they've experienced and to create dramatic monologues that tell their story in that way. So we're using the arts to try to tell the story of the pandemic and also to give some income to some working artists as well. We don't have a poetry workshop yet, Stuart, so if you're interested in doing one, I'd love to speak with you, or anybody who wants to contact me can just reach me through the website, Jack Pine Project, all one word, jackpineproject.com. So thank you very much.
I love hearing about all of the creative ways that creative people in Maine are thinking around this pandemic. It's very inspiring, and I love to hear the stories. We're just about out of time. So I wanted to thank Bari and Stuart and Mark for joining me tonight. It was such a wonderful conversation, and I am happy to have you here to talk about it and for people to understand really what you're going through and what Maine's going through as we rethink how to share the arts in our state with people who love them. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you, Bari, Stu, and Mark, so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us.
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks to the
much.
Bangor Daily News.
Great. Hope everyone has a great night and see you again soon.
Night.
Good night.